The desert wind carried sand across the compound like tiny needles against exposed skin. Staff Sergeant Maya Chen adjusted her cap and walked toward the medical tent, her boots making soft sounds against the packed earth. She had been stationed at Forward Operating Base Sentinel for 3 months now, and each day felt longer than the one before. Not because of the heat or the isolation or even the occasional sounds of distant conflict. It was something else entirely that made her days difficult. She pushed open the flap of the medical tent and stepped inside, where the air was slightly cooler thanks to the portable cooling units that hummed constantly in the corner. The tent was divided into several sections with temporary walls made of thick canvas. On one side were the examination beds, on the other side were the supply cabinets filled with bandages and medicines and equipment. In the back was a small area that served as her office, though office was a generous word for a metal desk and a folding chair. Maya set down her bag and began her morning routine. She checked the supply levels, made notes about what needed to be ordered, and prepared the examination area for the day ahead. This was her job, her purpose here at this small base in the middle of nowhere. She was the only medical professional assigned to FOB Sentinel, a tiny outpost that served as a waypoint for convoys and a monitoring station for the surrounding region. The base was small, housing perhaps 50 soldiers at any given time, along with a rotating group of contractors and support staff. It was not a glamorous posting. It was not the kind of place where heroes were made or where careers were advanced. It was a forgotten corner of the military machine, staffed by people who had either requested quiet postings or who had been sent there for reasons they did not discuss. Maya fell into the second category, though she never spoke about it. The morning passed slowly. She treated a cook who had burned his hand on a hot pan. She checked the blood pressure of a sergeant who was monitoring his hypertension. She bandaged a scrape on the knee of a young private who had tripped during morning exercises. These were the kinds of injuries and ailments she dealt with every day. Minor things. Routine things. Nothing that required real skill or training. Sometimes she wondered why they had sent her here at all. She had graduated at the top of her class in military nursing school. She had completed advanced trauma training and had been certified in emergency field medicine. She had skills that could save lives in the most desperate situations. But, instead of using those skills, she was here, counting bandages and treating sunburns. Around noon, the sound of laughter reached her ears from outside the tent. It was a familiar sound, one she had grown to expect. She continued with her work, trying to ignore it, but the voices grew louder as a group of soldiers walked past the medical tent. "Hey, look, the base nurse is actually working today," one voice said. "What do you think she is doing in there? Organizing her cotton balls?" More laughter followed. Maya kept her eyes on the supply list in front of her, her pen moving across the paper even though she was no longer reading what she was writing. "I heard she was supposed to be some kind of hotshot back in the real army," another voice added. "Special trauma training and everything. So what did she do to end up here with the rest of us losers?" "Probably messed up somewhere along the way," a third voice chimed in. "That is how it works, right? You screw up, and they send you to the end of the world where you cannot cause any more problems." The voices faded as the group moved on, but their words hung in the air like the dust that seemed to cover everything at FOB Sentinel. Maya set down her pen and took a deep breath. She had heard similar comments almost every day since she arrived. The soldiers here had their own theories about why she had been assigned to this forgotten outpost. None of them had ever asked her directly. None of them seemed interested in the truth. She looked down at her hands, at the fingers that had once worked to save lives under the most difficult circumstances. 3 months of treating minor cuts and headaches had not changed those hands, but sometimes she worried that they might. That the skills she had worked so hard to develop might fade away from lack of use, like muscles that weaken when they are not exercised. The afternoon brought more of the same. A contractor came in complaining of stomach troubles, which Maya diagnosed as a result of eating too much at lunch combined with the heat. A mechanic needed stitches after cutting his hand on a piece of equipment. Maya cleaned the wound carefully, applied local anesthetic, and sewed the skin closed with precise, practiced movements. The mechanic watched her work with surprise in his eyes. You are good at this, he said, as if he had not expected it. Thank you, Maya replied simply, keeping her focus on the task. I mean, really good. The way you work, it is like you have done this 1,000 times. More than that, Maya said, and she left it there. After the mechanic left, Maya sat in her small office area and ate her lunch alone, as she did every day. Through the canvas walls of the tent, she could hear the sounds of the base going about its business. Vehicles rumbled past. Soldiers called to each other. Somewhere, someone was playing music from a portable speaker, the sound distorted by distance and the wind. She thought about her life before this posting. She had been stationed at a major military hospital, working in the emergency department where the most serious cases were brought. She had treated soldiers who had been injured in combat, contractors who had been in accidents, civilians who had been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Every day had been a challenge, a test of her skills and her composure. She had thrived in that environment. And then, everything had changed. Maya pushed the memory away before it could fully form. There was no point in dwelling on the past. She was here now, at FOB Sentinel, and this was her reality. She finished her lunch, disposed of the packaging, and returned to her work. In the late afternoon, she decided to take a walk around the base. She told herself it was for exercise, but the truth was that she needed to get out of the medical tent, to see something other than the same canvas walls and metal furniture. She walked past the motor pool where soldiers were working on vehicles. She walked past the communications building where the radio operators worked. She walked past the mess hall where dinner preparations were already underway. Everywhere she went, she noticed the same thing. People saw her, recognized her, and then looked away. Some of them whispered to each other. Some of them smirked. Very few of them acknowledged her with anything more than a quick nod. Maya had learned not to take it personally, though that was easier said than done. She understood the culture of a place like FOB Sentinel. It was a small community where everyone knew everyone else, where reputations were established quickly and changed slowly. She was the outsider, the newcomer who had arrived with questions surrounding her. In the absence of answers, the soldiers had created their own stories. She completed her circuit of the base and returned to the medical tent as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The sky turned orange and pink and purple, colors so beautiful that they seemed out of place in this harsh landscape. Maya stood outside her tent for a moment, watching the sunset, allowing herself a brief moment of peace. Beautiful, is it not? The voice came from behind her, and Maya turned to find an older man standing a few feet away. He was wearing the uniform of a master sergeant, and his face was weathered in a way that spoke of many years spent in places like this one. His name was Thomas, and he was one of the few people at the base who had ever spoken to her with genuine kindness. It is, Maya agreed. Sometimes I forget to notice. Thomas nodded and came to stand beside her, both of them facing the fading light. I have been in the army for 30 years, he said. I have seen a lot of sunsets in a lot of different places. This one is pretty good. Maya smiled slightly. Pretty good is high praise from you. I do not give compliments lightly, Thomas said with a hint of humor in his voice. Then, his tone became more serious. I heard some of the soldiers talking earlier. About you. Maya's smile faded. I try not to pay attention to that kind of thing. That is probably wise, Thomas said. But, I want you to know something. Those soldiers, they do not know what they are talking about. They make assumptions because they do not have information. It is human nature to fill in the gaps with imagination when the facts are not available. And, you? Maya asked. What do you imagine? Thomas was quiet for a moment, considering the question. I do not imagine anything, he finally said. I have been around long enough to know that the truth is usually more complicated than any story we can invent. Whatever brought you here, it is your business. What matters is how you do your job, and, from what I have seen, you do it well. Maya felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the desert heat. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her like this. Thank you, Thomas.
That means more than you know. Just telling the truth, Thomas said. Now get some rest.
Tomorrow is another day, and who knows what it will bring. He walked away, leaving Maya alone with the last rays of the setting sun. She watched until the colors faded into darkness, and then, she went inside to prepare for the night.
The next few days passed much like the ones before. Maya treated minor injuries and illnesses.
She organized supplies and filed reports. She ate her meals alone and took her walks around the base. The other soldiers continued to ignore her or talk about her when they thought she could not hear. It was a routine that had become familiar, if not comfortable. On the fourth day, something different happened. Maya was in the middle of treating a soldier's infected bug bite when the sound of helicopters reached her ears.
This was not unusual in itself.
Helicopters came and went from FOB Sentinel with some regularity, bringing supplies and personnel and occasionally evacuating someone who needed more medical care than Maya could provide.
But there was something different about this sound.
These helicopters were flying faster and lower than normal, and there seemed to be more of them than usual. She finished her treatment quickly and stepped outside to see what was happening. Several other people had done the same thing, all of them looking up at the sky where 3 helicopters were approaching from the east. 2 of them were the standard transport helicopters that Maya had seen many times before.
But the third one was different.
It was an Apache attack helicopter, sleek and dangerous looking, its rotors cutting through the air with a distinctive sound.
The helicopters circled the base once before the 2 transport aircraft moved toward the landing zone.
The Apache remained in the air, hovering at a distance, watching over the landing like a predator keeping guard.
Maya watched with curiosity as the transport helicopters touched down and their doors opened.
Soldiers began to emerge, but these were not the ordinary soldiers that Maya was used to seeing at FOB Sentinel. These men moved differently, with a confidence and alertness that set them apart. Their equipment was different too, more specialized and more advanced.
Maya had seen soldiers like this before, in her previous life at the military hospital.
These were special forces operators, the kind of men who did the jobs that no one else could do. A crowd had gathered to watch the arrivals, and Maya heard murmurs of surprise and speculation around her. "What are special forces doing here?" someone asked. "Must be something big," another voice replied. "They do not just show up at a place like this for no reason." Maya watched as the Special Forces soldiers formed up and began moving across the base, escorted by the base commander and several other officers. They walked with purpose, clearly on a mission of some kind, though what that mission might be was anyone's guess. The Apache helicopter finally descended to land, its rotors slowing as it settled onto the ground. Maya expected the pilot to emerge, but for a long moment, nothing happened. The helicopter just sat there, its engine still running, as if waiting for something. And then, the pilot's door opened, and a figure stepped out. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the flight suit of an Apache pilot. He removed his helmet as he walked, revealing a face that was both handsome and hard, the face of someone who had seen things that most people could not imagine. His eyes scanned the gathered crowd, moving from face to face as if searching for something specific. Maya felt a strange sensation as she watched him, a feeling that she could not quite identify. There was something familiar about this man, though she was certain she had never seen him before. Or had she? The pilot's eyes continued their search until they found her. And then, they stopped. For a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. The sound of the helicopters, the murmur of the crowd, the ever-present wind, all of it became background noise to the intensity of that gaze. The pilot was looking directly at her, and there was recognition in his eyes. He said something to one of the officers standing nearby, and the officer's expression changed to one of surprise. There was a brief conversation, with the officer gesturing and the pilot nodding. And then, the pilot began walking toward her. The crowd parted as he approached, people stepping aside almost instinctively. Maya stood her ground, watching him come closer, her heart beating faster for reasons she did not fully understand. Around her, she could hear the whispers starting. Who is he looking at? Is that the base nurse? What would a Special Forces pilot want with her? The pilot stopped a few feet in front of Maya and looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were a deep brown, the color of rich earth, and there was an intensity in them that made it hard to look away. "Staff Sergeant Maya Chen?" he asked, his voice deep and steady. "Yes," Maya replied, surprised that her own voice came out so calmly.
"That is me."
The pilot nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. "I need to speak with you," he said.
"In private."
Around them, the whispers grew louder, but Maya barely heard them. She was focused entirely on the man in front of her, on the expression on his face, on the words he had just spoken.
"Of course," she said. "We can talk in the medical tent."
She turned and began walking toward the tent, and the pilot fell into step beside her. She could feel the eyes of everyone at the base following them, could practically hear the questions forming in their minds. But she did not look back. She kept her eyes forward, walking steadily toward the canvas structure that had been her sanctuary and her prison for the past 3 months. Once inside, she led the pilot to the back of the tent, to the small office area where they would have some privacy. She gestured toward the folding chair, offering him a seat, but he shook his head and remained standing.
"I will stand," he said. "What I have to say will not take long." Maya nodded and stood facing him, waiting for him to continue.
The pilot seemed to be gathering his thoughts, choosing his words carefully.
Finally, he spoke. "My name is Chief Warrant Officer Daniel Reyes.
I am the pilot of the Apache you saw outside. I am also the leader of a special operations team that has just arrived at this base." "I figured as much," Maya said. "What I do not understand is why you needed to speak with me." Daniel looked at her with those intense eyes, and, for a moment, Maya felt as if he were seeing straight through her, past the uniform and the title and the wall she had built around herself.
"Because I know who you are," he said quietly. "Not just your name or your rank. I know what you did. I know what you are capable of.
And I know why you are here, at this forgotten outpost at the end of the world."
Maya felt her blood run cold.
She had worked so hard to put the past behind her, to forget what had happened and move on. And now here was this stranger, this pilot she had never met, claiming to know her secrets. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said, but, even to her own ears, the words sounded hollow. Daniel reached into his flight suit and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Maya, and she took it with fingers that had begun to tremble slightly. She unfolded the paper and looked at what was written there. It was a medical report, dated 18 months ago, from the military hospital where she had worked before being transferred to FOB Sentinel. And, at the bottom of the report, in her own handwriting, was her signature. 18 months ago, Daniel said, a soldier was brought into your emergency department with injuries so severe that everyone else had given up on him.
Multiple gunshot wounds, massive internal bleeding, traumatic brain injury.
The other doctors said there was nothing that could be done. They said he was already dead, that his body just had not realized it yet.
But you did not give up.
You worked on him for 6 hours, performing surgery after surgery, keeping him alive through sheer force of will. And, when it was over, against all odds, he survived. Maya stared at the paper in her hands, memories flooding back despite her efforts to keep them at bay. She remembered that night, remembered the blood and the chaos and the desperate fight to save a life that everyone else had written off. She remembered the faces of the other doctors and nurses, their expressions of disbelief as she refused to stop trying. "That soldier," Daniel continued, his voice growing softer, "was my brother."
Maya looked up sharply, meeting Daniel's eyes.
In them, she saw something she had not expected.
Gratitude.
And something else, something deeper, something that made her heart ache in a way she had forgotten it could. "Your brother," she whispered.
Daniel nodded.
"His name is Marcus Reyes. He is a staff sergeant in the infantry. Or at least he was, before that night. Now he is a civilian, medically retired, living back home with his wife and his 2 children. Children who still have a father because of you."
Maya did not know what to say.
She remembered Marcus now, remembered his face from the hospital bed after the surgery, remembered the way he had looked at her when he finally woke up days later. But she had never known what happened to him after he left her care. She had been too consumed by what came next. "I have been looking for you for a long time," Daniel said. "When I heard what happened after you saved my brother, when I heard that you were being punished for doing your job, I started trying to find you. But you had disappeared into the system, transferred to some remote posting that no one seemed to know about. It took me months to track you down." "Why?" Maya asked. "Why would you go to so much trouble?" Daniel took a step closer, and, when he spoke, his voice was filled with an emotion that Maya could not quite name. "Because I owe you everything," he said. "My brother is alive because of you. His children have a father because of you. And, instead of being honored for what you did, you were sent here to be forgotten. That is not right. That is not justice." Maya felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had not cried in a very long time, had taught herself to keep her emotions locked away where they could not hurt her. But this man, the stranger who was not really a stranger at all, was breaking through her defenses in a way she had not expected. "What happened after?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was complicated. There were reasons." "I know," Daniel said. "I know about the investigation. I know about the accusations. I know about the deal you made to avoid a court-martial. You took the fall for something that was not your fault, all to protect the people who had failed my brother before you ever got to him." Maya closed her eyes, the memories washing over her like a wave. The investigation. The accusations of unauthorized procedures. The threats against her career, her reputation, her freedom. And, finally, the deal. She would accept a transfer to a remote posting, would disappear into obscurity, and, in return, the investigation would be quietly closed. The doctors who had really been at fault, the ones whose negligence had nearly cost Marcus his life, would face no consequences. She had taken the deal because she had no choice. Because fighting would have meant dragging Marcus and his family into the spotlight. Because winning was never guaranteed, and losing would have meant losing everything. "Why are you here?" Maya asked, opening her eyes to look at Daniel. "Why are you telling me all of this now?" Daniel reached out and gently took the paper from her hands, folding it and putting it back in his flight suit. "Because I need your help," he said. "And because I wanted you to know, before I asked, that I know exactly who I am asking. You are not the washed-up nurse that everyone here thinks you are. You are one of the most skilled medical professionals in the entire military. And, right now, I need someone with your skills." Maya felt a spark of something she had not felt in months. It took her a moment to recognize it for what it was. Hope. "What kind of help?" she asked. Daniel's expression grew serious, the weight of his mission showing in the lines of his face. "That is classified," he said. "I cannot tell you the details until you agree to be part of the team. But I can tell you this. There are lives at stake. Good people who are depending on us to bring them home safely. And I believe you are the only one who can help us do it." Maya looked at this man, this pilot who had crossed paths with her in the most unexpected way. She thought about the months she had spent at this base, the loneliness and the isolation and the feeling that her skills were going to waste. She thought about the soldiers who laughed at her, who assumed the worst about her, who had no idea what she was truly capable of. And then, she thought about Marcus Reyes, the soldier she had saved, the man who was alive because she had refused to give up when everyone else had. "When do we start?" she asked. For the first time since he had arrived, Daniel smiled. It was a small smile, just a slight upturn at the corners of his mouth, but it transformed his face in a way that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. "Right now," he said. "We have a lot of work to do, and not much time to do it." He turned and began walking toward the exit of the tent. Maya stood for a moment, gathering herself, feeling the weight of the decision she had just made. And then, she followed him, stepping out of the medical tent and into the fading light of another desert evening. Outside, the other soldiers were still watching, still whispering, still trying to figure out what was happening. Maya saw Thomas standing at the edge of the crowd, and, when their eyes met, he gave her a small nod of approval. She nodded back, grateful for his quiet support. As she walked across the compound beside Daniel Reyes, Maya felt something shifting inside her. For the first time in months, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and unknown challenges. But she was not afraid. She was ready. The sun had set completely by the time they reached the building where the Special Forces team was setting up their operations center. Daniel held the door open for Maya, and she stepped inside, leaving behind the person she had been at FOB Sentinel and stepping into whatever came next. Behind her, she heard the whispers of the soldiers who had watched her go. But, for once, she did not care what they were saying. For once, she was focused on the future rather than the past. And, for the first time in a very long time, that future looked bright. The operations center was nothing like the medical tent that Maya had grown accustomed to over the past 3 months. Where her workspace was quiet and mostly empty, this room was alive with activity. Soldiers moved purposefully between stations set up with laptops and communication equipment. Maps covered the walls, marked with symbols and notations that Maya did not fully understand. The air hummed with the sound of voices and the clicking of keyboards. Daniel led her through the organized chaos to a corner where several members of his team had gathered around a large table. They looked up as he approached, their expressions curious but guarded. Maya recognized the look in their eyes. They were sizing her up, trying to determine if she belonged here among them. "This is Staff Sergeant Maya Chen," Daniel announced. "She is going to be our medical support for this operation." The men around the table exchanged glances. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard, stepped forward. "No offense, Chief," he said, "but we were told we would be getting a field surgeon from Camp Phoenix. Someone with combat medical experience." "Change of plans," Daniel replied simply. "Staff Sergeant Chen has more relevant experience than anyone they could send from Phoenix." The bearded man did not look convinced. "Relevant experience?" "She has been sitting at this base treating sunburns and stomach aches for months." "How is that relevant to what we are about to do?" Maya felt the familiar sting of being underestimated, but she kept her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that defending herself with words rarely changed anyone's mind. The best way to prove herself was through actions. Daniel, however, was not so restrained. "Sergeant First Class Thompson," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. 18 months ago, Staff Sergeant Chen performed 6 consecutive surgeries on a soldier with injuries so severe that every other doctor at the hospital had given up on him. She kept him alive through situations that most surgeons would have declared hopeless. "That soldier is my brother." The room went quiet. Thompson's expression shifted from skepticism to surprise, and then, to something that might have been respect. The other soldiers were watching with renewed interest. "So when I say she has relevant experience," Daniel continued, "I mean that she has done things that most medical professionals could not even imagine. And if anything goes wrong on this mission, she is exactly the person I want by our side." Thompson looked at Maya with new eyes. "Is that true?" he asked. "What the chief said." Maya met his gaze steadily. "Everything he said is true. I do not expect you to trust me based on words alone. But give me a chance, and I will show you what I can do." There was a moment of silence as Thompson considered her response. Then, he extended his hand. "Fair enough," he said. "I am Thompson. Welcome to the team." Maya shook his hand firmly, feeling a small barrier break down between them. One by one, the other members of the team introduced themselves. There was Sergeant Jackson, the team's communications specialist, a young man with quick eyes and nervous energy. There was Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the weapons expert, a quiet man with a calm demeanor that suggested he had seen more than his share of combat. And there was Sergeant Williams, the team's intelligence analyst, a woman with short hair and sharp features who studied Maya with particular intensity. "So now that we are all acquainted," Daniel said, drawing everyone's attention back to the table, "let us get to work. Williams, bring Chen up to speed on the situation." Williams nodded and turned to a laptop that was connected to a projector. An image appeared on the wall, showing a map of the region with several locations marked in red. 3 days ago, Williams began, one of our intelligence assets in the region went dark.
Her name is Sarah Mitchell.
She has been operating undercover for the past 2 years, gathering information on militia movements and supply lines. She is one of our most valuable people in this area.
Maya studied the map, trying to absorb the information.
She had limited experience with intelligence operations, but she understood the gravity of what Williams was describing. We believe she has been captured by a militia group operating in this region, Williams continued, pointing to a cluster of red marks on the map. They have been growing more aggressive over the past few months, and our intelligence suggests they are planning something big. Something that could destabilize the entire region.
Do we know where they are holding her? Maya asked.
Williams switched to a satellite image showing a compound nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains.
This is the most likely location.
It is a heavily fortified compound that serves as the militia's primary base of operations.
Getting in will be difficult. Getting out will be even harder.
And that is where you come in, Daniel added, looking at Maya. Our plan is to insert by helicopter, infiltrate the compound, locate Mitchell, and extract her before the militia knows what is happening. But things rarely go according to plan. If Mitchell has been injured, or if any of our team gets hurt during the operation, we need someone who can provide immediate medical care. Maya felt the weight of the responsibility settling on her shoulders. This was not like treating cuts and bruises at the base. This was a combat situation where split-second decisions could mean the difference between life and death.
I understand, she said. Tell me more about what I will need to prepare. Over the next several hours, Maya immersed herself in the details of the operation.
She reviewed medical files and emergency protocols. She learned about the weapons and equipment the team would be carrying. She studied the layout of the compound and memorized the extraction points.
And, all the while, she felt the eyes of the team on her, watching to see if she was truly capable of handling what lay ahead.
As the night wore on, the operations center gradually emptied as team members went to get whatever rest they could before the mission. Finally, only Maya and Daniel remained, standing over the table covered with maps and documents. You should get some sleep, Daniel said.
Tomorrow is going to be a long day. Maya nodded but did not move.
There was something she needed to ask, something that had been on her mind since their conversation in the medical tent. Why did you really come looking for me? She asked. I mean, I understand that you feel grateful for what I did for your brother.
But there must be other medics you could have chosen for this mission. Why go to all the trouble of finding me?
Daniel was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the map in front of them. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before, less like a commanding officer and more like a man carrying a heavy burden. Because I made a promise, he said. When my brother woke up in that hospital, when he realized he was still alive, the first thing he asked was about the nurse who had saved him.
He wanted to thank you in person.
But by the time he was well enough to look for you, you were gone. Maya remembered the chaos of those weeks after Marcus's surgery. The investigation, the accusations, the endless meetings with lawyers and administrators. She had been so focused on survival that she had never thought about what had happened to the soldiers she had saved. Marcus never forgot you, Daniel continued. Every year on the anniversary of that night, he lights a candle in your honor. He says a prayer for the woman who gave him back his life. When he heard what happened to you, how you were punished for saving him, it broke his heart. Maya felt tears threatening again, and this time she did not try to hold them back. They slid down her cheeks silently, carrying with them months of loneliness and pain that she had kept locked away. He asked me to find you, Daniel said. He asked me to make sure you were okay, to help you if you needed it. And, when this mission came up, when I learned that we needed a medic with exceptional skills, I knew exactly who to call. It was not just about gratitude. It was about justice. Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. I never expected any thanks, she said. I was just doing my job. That is exactly what Marcus said you would say, Daniel replied with a small smile. He told me you were humble, that you would not understand why anyone would go to such lengths for you. But, Maya, what you did that night was not just doing your job.
It was extraordinary.
And you deserve to be recognized for it. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Then, Daniel reached out and placed his hand on Maya's shoulder, a gesture of comfort and solidarity.
Get some rest, he said again. Tomorrow, we start proving to everyone what you are truly capable of.
Maya watched him leave, her mind swirling with emotion she had not allowed herself to feel in a very long time. Then, she gathered her things and made her way to the quarters she had been assigned, a small room in a building that was far nicer than her usual accommodations. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Her world had been turned upside down, and she was not sure how to make sense of it all. But one thing was clear. For the first time in months, she had a purpose. She had a team. And she had a chance to do what she had been trained to do. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, her dreams were filled with images of helicopters and mountains and a woman named Sarah Mitchell who was waiting to be saved. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as the team made final preparations for the mission. Maya spent several hours organizing medical supplies, carefully selecting what to bring and what to leave behind. In a combat situation, every ounce of weight mattered, and she had to balance the need for comprehensive medical equipment against the practical limitations of what she could carry. She packed trauma kits and surgical tools, painkillers and antibiotics, bandages and blood clotting agents. She included items for treating bullet wounds and shrapnel injuries, burns and fractures. She tried to anticipate every possible scenario, knowing that in the field, there would be no time to second-guess her choices. As she worked, she became aware of Thompson watching her from across the room. The big man had said little to her since their introduction the night before, but there was something different about his expression now. It was less hostile, more curious. "You know what you are doing," he observed, coming to stand beside her. "The way you are packing that kit, it is methodical. Professional." "I have done this before," Maya replied, not looking up from her work. "Not exactly like this, but similar enough."
"In the hospital?"
"Before the hospital." Maya finished securing the last of the supplies and, finally, met Thompson's eyes. "I did 2 tours in an active combat zone before I went to nursing school."
"Field medic attached to an infantry unit."
Thompson's eyebrows rose.
"I did not know that."
"There is a lot you do not know about me, Sergeant. Most people look at me and see a woman playing at being a soldier. They do not see the years of training, the experience, the sacrifices. They just see what they want to see." Thompson was quiet for a moment, processing her words. "I apologize," he said finally, "for what I said last night. I made assumptions about you that were not fair." Maya allowed herself a small smile. "Apology accepted. Now, if you do not mind, I need to finish preparing. We have a long day ahead of us." Thompson nodded and walked away, leaving Maya to her work. She finished packing her medical kit and moved on to checking her personal equipment. Body armor, communications gear, sidearm. Everything had to be in perfect working order. There would be no room for mistakes. By midday, the team had gathered in the operations center for a final briefing. Daniel stood at the front of the room, his demeanor all business as he walked them through the plan one last time. "We inserted 0300 hours," he said, pointing to the map on the wall. 2 transport helicopters will carry the team to this landing zone, approximately 2 kilometers from the target compound. My Apache will provide air support and cover for the insertion. He traced a path from the landing zone to the compound. "From the LZ, we move on foot through this terrain. It is rough country, lots of rocks and valleys, so we need to be careful with our footing." We reached the compound perimeter at approximately 0330. Williams took over, displaying images of the compound layout. "Intelligence suggests the militia is holding Mitchell in this building here, near the center of the compound. The plan is to breach here and, here simultaneously, neutralize any resistance, and extract Mitchell before the enemy can mount an organized response.
What about guards? Rodriguez asked. How many are we looking at?
Estimates range from 20 to 30 armed personnel on site at any given time, Williams replied. Most of them will be sleeping at 0330, but we should expect at least 6 to 8 guards on active patrol.
And extraction?
Once we have Mitchell, we fall back to a secondary landing zone located here, Daniel said, pointing to a spot on the map.
The helicopters will pick us up and transport us back to base. Total time on the ground should be no more than 45 minutes. Maya listened carefully, committing every detail to memory.
She had been briefed on her specific role during the operation.
She would remain with the main group during the insertion, ready to provide immediate medical assistance if needed.
Once they reached the compound, she would stay close to Daniel while the assault teams breached the buildings. Her priority was to assess Mitchell's condition and prepare her for extraction. If anyone on the team was injured, she would triage and treat them as quickly as possible. It was a lot of responsibility, and Maya felt the pressure keenly. But she also felt something else, something she had almost forgotten.
Confidence.
She knew what she was capable of, even if others did not. And, tonight, she would prove it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of final preparations and quiet tension.
Maya found herself spending a lot of time alone, going over her medical protocols and mental checklists.
She wanted to be ready for anything. As evening approached, she stepped outside for some fresh air and found the base transformed by the day's activities.
Soldiers who had spent months ignoring her were now watching her with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty.
Word had spread about the Special Forces mission and her role in it. The nurse they had mocked was suddenly someone to be taken seriously.
Maya spotted Thomas near the motor pool and walked over to join him.
The older soldier looked up as she approached, a knowing smile on his weathered face.
"Sounds like quite an adventure you are going on," he said. "That is one word for it. Are you ready?" Maya considered the question carefully. "I think so. I have prepared as much as I can. The rest is up to fate." Thomas nodded. "That is the way of it in this line of work. You do everything you can, and then you trust that it will be enough." He paused, looking at her with something like pride in his eyes. "For what it is worth, I always knew there was more to you than what everyone here saw. I am glad you are getting the chance to show it." "Thank you, Thomas. That means a lot."
They stood together in companionable silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. It reminded Maya of their conversation a few days earlier, when Thomas had spoken to her about sunsets and truth. So much had changed since then. "Take care of yourself out there," Thomas said finally. "Come back in one piece." "I will do my best." She shook his hand and, then, made her way back to the operations center, where the team was gathering for their final meal before the mission. The atmosphere was subdued but focused. Everyone knew what was at stake, and everyone was dealing with the tension in their own way. Maya sat next to Williams, who had been warming up to her over the course of the day. The intelligence analyst was younger than Maya had first assumed, probably no more than 25, with a sharp mind and a dry sense of humor.
"First special ops mission?"
Williams asked, passing Maya a tray of food.
"First one like this," Maya admitted.
"I have been in combat before, but never as part of a team like this."
"You will do fine. I have seen the way you work, the way you prepare. You are methodical, thorough. That is exactly what we need out there." Maya appreciated the encouragement.
It was strange, she reflected, how quickly she had found acceptance among this group of elite soldiers after months of isolation at the base. Perhaps it was because they judged people by their capabilities rather than their reputations. Or perhaps it was simply because Daniel had vouched for her, and his word carried weight.
After dinner, the team began loading onto the helicopters.
Maya climbed into one of the transport aircraft and found a seat next to Rodriguez, the quiet weapons expert. He gave her a brief nod of acknowledgement before returning to his own thoughts. The helicopter's rotors began to spin, the noise building to a roar that made conversation impossible. Maya felt her heart beating faster as the aircraft lifted off the ground and climbed into the night sky. Through the window, she could see the lights of the base growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. They were on their way. The flight to the landing zone took approximately an hour. Maya spent most of it in silence, mentally rehearsing the procedures she might need to perform. Around her, the other soldiers were equally quiet, each one preparing in their own way for what lay ahead. As they neared the landing zone, Daniel's voice came over the radio, calm and steady. 2 minutes to touchdown. Everyone check your gear and stand by. Maya went through her equipment one final time, making sure everything was in place. Her medical kit was secured to her back, her sidearm was holstered at her hip, and her body armor was properly fitted. She was as ready as she would ever be. The helicopter began its descent, and Maya felt her stomach lurch as the ground rushed up to meet them. There was a bump as they touched down, and then the doors flew open and soldiers began pouring out into the darkness. Maya followed, her boots hitting rocky ground as she moved away from the aircraft. The night was cold and clear, with more stars visible than she had ever seen in her life. Under other circumstances, it might have been beautiful. But right now, all Maya could focus on was the mission. The team formed up quickly and began moving toward the target compound. Daniel was at the front, leading the way with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. Maya stayed in the middle of the group, surrounded by soldiers who moved like shadows through the rough terrain. The 2 kilometers to the compound passed in tense silence. Every sound seemed magnified in the darkness. Every rock and depression in the ground was a potential obstacle. But the team moved with practiced efficiency, navigating the landscape as if they had been born to it. Finally, they reached the edge of the compound. Maya could see it now, a collection of buildings surrounded by walls and watchtowers, dimly lit by scattered lights. Somewhere inside those walls, Sarah Mitchell was waiting. Maya hoped she was still alive. Daniel gathered the team for final instructions. He spoke in whispered tones, his words barely audible even to those standing right next to him. Alpha team breaches here. Bravo team breaches here. Chen, you stay with me. We go in after Alpha secures the first building. Maya nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. Everything she had prepared for was about to be put to the test. Daniel gave the signal, and the teams moved into position. For a moment, everything was still. And then, with a sudden burst of controlled violence, the operation began. Explosions ripped through the night as the assault teams breached the compound walls. Gunfire erupted, the sound echoing off the mountains that surrounded the valley. Maya heard shouts in a language she did not understand, followed by more gunfire and the thud of bodies hitting the ground. Move! Daniel shouted, and Maya followed him through the smoke and chaos into the compound. They crossed the open ground between the wall and the first building, moving fast and low. Maya could see muzzle flashes in the darkness, could hear the crack of bullets passing nearby. Her training took over, and she focused on putting one foot in front of the other, trusting Daniel to lead her to where she needed to be. They reached the building where intelligence said Mitchell was being held. The door had already been breached by Alpha Team, and the sounds of close-quarters combat echoed from inside. Daniel led Maya through the doorway and into a narrow hallway lit by flickering electric lights. Bodies lay on the floor, militia fighters who had been caught off guard by the assault. Maya stepped over them without pausing, her focus entirely on finding their objective. This way, Daniel said, turning down a corridor that led deeper into the building. They passed several more rooms, some empty, some containing prisoners who looked up at them with terrified eyes. Maya made mental notes of their locations, knowing that they would need to account for them during the extraction. But her priority was Mitchell, and she could not stop until they found her. At the end of the corridor, they came to a heavy metal door that was locked from the outside. Daniel nodded to Thompson, who had joined them along the way, and the big man stepped forward with a breaching charge. Seconds later, the door blew inward with a deafening bang. Maya followed Daniel into the room beyond, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. And there, in the corner, she saw a figure huddled on the floor.
Sarah Mitchell.
Maya rushed to her side, her medical training kicking in automatically. Mitchell was alive, but barely. She was emaciated and dehydrated, with signs of significant physical trauma. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, and her pulse was weak and thready. "I need to stabilize her," Maya said to Daniel. "She is in bad shape."
"How long do you need?"
Maya assessed the situation quickly, her mind racing through the possibilities.
10 minutes. Maybe less if I am lucky.
You have 5.
Make it count.
Maya did not argue. She opened her medical kit and went to work, her hands moving with practiced precision. She started in 4-line and began administering fluids. She cleaned and bandaged the worst of Mitchell's wounds. She gave her medications to stabilize her blood pressure and reduce her pain. Around her, the sounds of combat continued. Gunfire echoed through the building, punctuated by explosions and shouted commands. But Maya blocked it all out, focusing entirely on the woman in front of her. For minutes later, she looked up at Daniel.
"She is stable enough to move.
But we need to get her to a hospital as soon as possible."
Daniel nodded and spoke into his radio.
"Package secured.
Beginning extraction. All teams fall back to the LZ."
Thompson moved forward and carefully lifted Mitchell in his arms. The woman moaned weakly but did not wake. Maya stayed close, monitoring her condition as they began the journey out of the compound. The trip back to the landing zone was more chaotic than the approach had been. The militia had recovered from the initial surprise and was now mounting a counterattack. Bullets whizzed through the air as the team fought their way out, covering each other's movements with suppressing fire. Maya felt something graze her shoulder, a burning sensation that told her she had been hit. But she kept moving, kept following Thompson and his precious cargo, kept her focus on the mission. There would be time to deal with her own injuries later. They burst through the compound wall and into the open ground beyond. The helicopters were already approaching, their rotors beating the air into a frenzy. Maya could see Daniel's Apache circling overhead, its guns spitting fire at the militia positions behind them. The transport helicopter touched down, and the team began boarding. Thompson carried Mitchell inside and laid her on the floor of the aircraft. Maya climbed in after him, immediately returning to her patient's side to continue monitoring her condition. The last of the team was aboard, and the helicopter lifted off, climbing rapidly into the night sky.
Below them, the compound was in chaos, fires burning and fighters scattering.
But they had what they came for. Sarah Mitchell was safe. As the helicopter headed back toward base, Maya finally allowed herself to feel the pain in her shoulder. She looked down and saw that her uniform was soaked with blood. The wound was not serious, just a graze, but it would need to be treated.
Williams noticed and moved to help.
"You are hurt," she said.
"It is nothing," Maya replied. "Just a scratch."
"That scratch is bleeding pretty badly. Let me take care of it." Maya was about to protest, but Williams was already reaching for the medical supplies. It felt strange, being on the receiving end of medical care after so many years of providing it. But she let Williams clean and bandage the wound, grateful for the help. Across the helicopter, Thompson was watching Mitchell with concern in his eyes. The woman was still unconscious, but her vital signs had stabilized thanks to Maya's treatment. She would survive, assuming they could get her to a hospital in time. Daniel's voice came over the radio.
"Good work, everyone. Mission accomplished."
Maya leaned back against the wall of the helicopter, exhaustion washing over her now that the adrenaline was fading.
She had done it.
She had proven herself. And, somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Sentinel just as dawn was breaking over the horizon. Maya had spent the entire flight monitoring Sarah Mitchell's condition, making small adjustments to her treatment as needed and watching for any signs of deterioration. The intelligence asset remained unconscious, but her vital signs had strengthened during the journey, and Maya was cautiously optimistic about her chances. A medical evacuation team was waiting on the landing pad, ready to transport Mitchell to the military hospital at Camp Phoenix. Maya briefed them quickly on her patient's condition, handing over her notes and treatment records before watching as they loaded Mitchell into their helicopter. "You did good work out there," one of the medics told her. "She would not have made it without you." Maya nodded tiredly, the weight of the night finally catching up with her. "Just doing my job." The medic looked like he wanted to say something more, but the helicopter's rotors were already spinning up, and there was no time for conversation. He gave her a quick salute and then climbed aboard, and seconds later the aircraft was lifting off, carrying Sarah Mitchell toward the advanced medical care she needed. Maya stood on the landing pad and watched until the helicopter disappeared into the brightening sky. Only then did she allow herself to feel the full extent of her exhaustion. Her shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed her, and every muscle in her body ached from the tension and exertion of the mission. She wanted nothing more than to collapse into bed and sleep for a week. But, as she turned to leave the landing pad, she found herself facing a crowd that had gathered to watch the team's return. Soldiers from all over the base had come out to see the Special Forces operators, and, among them, Maya spotted many faces she recognized. The cook who had burned his hand. The sergeant with hypertension. The private who had scraped his knee. All of them were looking at her with expressions that ranged from surprise to disbelief to something that might have been admiration. Maya felt uncomfortable under their scrutiny. She was not used to being the center of attention, especially not at this base where she had spent months being ignored and ridiculed. She wanted to slip away quietly, to avoid the questions and the stares and everything that came with them. But Daniel intercepted her before she could escape. "Not so fast," he said, a hint of warmth in his voice despite his own obvious fatigue. "There are some people who want to talk to you." He led her toward the base commander's office, and Maya's stomach tightened with apprehension. She had not had much interaction with Colonel Harris since arriving at FOB Sentinel. The man was an efficient administrator but distant, more concerned with the smooth operation of his base than with the individual soldiers under his command. She had no idea what he might want with her now. The colonel's office was small but well organized, with maps on the walls and reports stacked neatly on his desk. Harris himself was a stern-looking man in his 50s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He stood as Maya and Daniel entered, and his expression was unreadable. "Staff Sergeant Chen," he said, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Chief Warrant Officer Reyes has been telling me about your performance on this mission. It seems I owe you an apology." Maya blinked, caught off guard. "Sir?" Harris sighed and sat back down, looking suddenly older than his years. "When you were assigned to this base, I was given a file that painted you in a very unflattering light. I was told that you had been involved in an incident at your previous posting, that you had violated protocols and endangered patients. I was told to keep an eye on you, to make sure you did not cause any more problems." Maya felt a familiar anger stirring in her chest, but she kept her face neutral. "With respect, sir, that file does not tell the whole story." "I am beginning to understand that," Harris replied. "Chief Warrant Officer Reyes has given me his version of events, and, I have to say, it paints a very different picture. One where a dedicated nurse saved a man's life against impossible odds, and was then punished for doing so." He paused, his eyes meeting Maya's. "I should have looked into your background more thoroughly when you arrived. I should have questioned the narrative I was given instead of accepting it at face value. Instead, I allowed you to be marginalized and mistreated by the soldiers under my command. For that, I am truly sorry." Maya did not know what to say. She had spent so long accepting her fate, so long believing that the truth would never come out, that this sudden acknowledgement caught her completely by surprise. "Thank you, sir," she finally managed. "I appreciate that." Harris nodded and stood again, extending his hand. "You have proven yourself tonight in a way that few soldiers ever get the chance to. I intend to make sure that your service is properly recognized. And if there is anything I can do to help you move forward from this point, you have my full support." Maya shook his hand, feeling something shift inside her. It was not quite forgiveness. The months of isolation and ridicule had left scars that would take time to heal. But it was a start. A step towards something better. After leaving the colonel's office, Maya made her way back to her quarters. The base was still buzzing with activity as word of the successful mission spread. Soldiers who had never acknowledged her before now nodded respectfully as she passed. Some even stopped to offer congratulations or to thank her for her service. It was surreal, and Maya was not entirely sure how to respond. She reached her room and closed the door behind her, finally, alone with her thoughts. She sat on the edge of her bed and let out a long, shaky breath. The events of the past 2 days felt like a dream, too strange and wonderful to be real. She half expected to wake up and find herself back in the old routine, treating minor injuries and being mocked by people who did not know her true worth. But, as she looked down at the bandage on her shoulder, she knew it was all real. She had gone on a special forces mission. She had saved a life. She had proven herself in a way that no one could deny. A knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Daniel standing in the hallway, freshly showered and changed but still looking exhausted. "I wanted to check on you," he said. "How is your shoulder?" "It will heal," Maya replied, stepping aside to let him in. "The wound was superficial. A few days of rest and it will be fine." Daniel entered the room but did not sit down. He seemed uncertain, which was strange for a man who had commanded a special forces operation with such confidence just hours ago. "I also wanted to thank you," he said. "What you did tonight, the way you handled Mitchell, it was exactly what I knew you were capable of. My brother was right about you." Maya felt warmth spread through her chest at the mention of Marcus. "I was just doing my job," she said, echoing her earlier words. "The same thing I would do for anyone." "That is what makes you special," Daniel said. "Most people would have given up on Marcus that night. Most people would have followed the other doctor's lead and declared him beyond saving. But you refused to accept that. You fought for him when no one else would. And, because of that, he gets to live his life, raise his children, grow old with his wife." He paused, his eyes searching her face. "Do you have any idea how rare that is? How few people in this world would go to such lengths for a complete stranger?" Maya did not have an answer for him. She had never thought of herself as extraordinary. She had just done what her training and her instincts told her to do. The idea that this made her special, that it set her apart from others, was difficult to accept. "I should let you rest," Daniel said, moving toward the door. "But I wanted you to know something first. I have put in a request to have you reassigned. If it is approved, you would be transferred to a position where your skills can actually be used. Where you can make a real difference." Maya's heart skipped a beat. "Reassigned? Where?" "The special medical unit at the regional hospital. It is the best trauma center in the area, and they are always looking for talented medical professionals. I cannot guarantee anything, but I have some connections, and I intend to use them on your behalf." Maya was speechless. The regional hospital was one of the most prestigious postings in the military medical corps. Working there would mean access to resources and training opportunities that she could only dream of at FOB Sentinel. It would mean doing the work she had trained for, saving lives that truly needed saving. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "That is incredibly generous of you." "It is the least I can do," Daniel replied. "After everything you have done for my family, this is nothing." He opened the door and paused on the threshold, looking back at her one last time. "Get some rest, Maya. You have earned it." And then, he was gone, leaving Maya alone with her swirling thoughts and emotions. She did not sleep well that day. Her mind kept returning to the events of the mission, replaying them over and over like a movie she could not turn off. She saw Mitchell's face, pale and bruised, in the dim light of that cell. She felt the impact of the bullet grazing her shoulder. She heard the roar of the helicopter's rotors and the crack of gunfire in the darkness. By late afternoon, she gave up on rest and decided to take a walk around the base. The atmosphere had changed dramatically since the mission. Where before there had been whispers and snickers behind her back, now there was open respect and curiosity. Soldiers who had avoided her for months now sought her out, wanting to hear about the operation, wanting to know what it had been like. Maya found herself telling the story again and again, though she was careful to focus on the team effort rather than her own contributions. She did not want to be seen as someone who sought glory or recognition. She just wanted to do her job and do it well. As evening fell, she made her way to the mess hall for dinner. The room was crowded with soldiers, and the noise level was higher than usual as everyone discussed the successful mission. Maya collected her tray and looked for a place to sit, expecting to find her usual spot in the corner where no one would bother her. But, before she could reach it, Thompson appeared at her side. "Chen," he said, nodding toward a table where the Special Forces team had gathered. "You are eating with us." It was not a question, and Maya did not argue. She followed Thompson to the table and took a seat between Rodriguez and Williams. The conversation was light and easy, with everyone still riding the high of their successful operation. For the first time since arriving at FOB Sentinel, Maya felt like she truly belonged. As the meal wound down, Jackson raised his glass of water in a toast. "To Chen," he said. "The nurse who is not just a nurse." The others raised their glasses and echoed the sentiment. Maya felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, but she also felt something else. Pride. Acceptance. A sense of connection that she had been missing for so long. After dinner, she returned to the medical tent to check on things. The space felt different now, somehow smaller and less isolating than it had before. She walked among the supply cabinets and examination beds, touching familiar objects and remembering all the hours she had spent here, alone and undervalued. The door flap rustled, and Maya turned to find Daniel standing at the entrance. He had changed into casual clothes and looked more relaxed than she had ever seen him. "I thought I might find you here," he said. "Old habits," Maya replied with a small smile. "Even after everything that has happened, this place still feels like home." Daniel walked into the tent and looked around, taking in the modest setup. "It is hard to believe you spent 3 months here," he said. "All this potential, wasted on band-aids and aspirin." "It was not entirely wasted," Maya said. "I helped people, even if the injuries were minor. And I learned something about myself along the way." "What did you learn?" Maya considered the question carefully. "I learned that my value does not depend on what other people think of me. I knew what I was capable of, even when no one else did. And I kept myself ready, kept my skills sharp, so that when the opportunity came, I would be prepared." Daniel nodded slowly, a look of admiration in his eyes. "That takes incredible strength. Most people would have given in to despair, let themselves be diminished by the way they were treated. But you did not." "I had moments of doubt," Maya admitted. "Plenty of them. But I also had something to hold on to. The memory of the lives I had saved, the knowledge that I had made a difference even if no one knew about it. That was enough to keep me going." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who had found an unexpected connection in the midst of chaos and uncertainty. Then, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I received a response to my transfer request," he said. "It came through faster than I expected." Maya's heart began to race. "And?" Daniel handed her the paper, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "See for yourself." Maya unfolded the paper and read the contents. It was an official transfer order, assigning her to the regional medical center effective immediately. She would be joining the trauma surgery team, working under some of the most skilled surgeons in the military medical corps. "This is real," she breathed, hardly daring to believe it. "This is actually happening." "You leave in 3 days," Daniel confirmed. "There will be a transport helicopter taking some equipment to the regional base, and you will be on it." Maya looked up at him, tears forming in her eyes for what felt like the 100th time in the past 2 days. "I do not know how to thank you for this. For everything." "You do not have to thank me," Daniel said. "You earned this, Maya.
All I did was make sure the right people knew about it."
He paused, and something shifted in his expression. Something more personal, more vulnerable.
"But there is something I would like to ask you. A favor, if you will."
"Anything," Maya said without hesitation.
"My brother wants to meet you. Properly, this time. He wants to thank you in person for what you did for him." Daniel hesitated, then continued.
"I was thinking, once you are settled at the regional base, maybe I could arrange a video call. He and his family would love to see the person who gave them their life back."
Maya felt a lump forming in her throat.
She thought about Marcus Reyes, the soldier she had saved so many months ago. She thought about the wife and children who still had a husband and father because of her actions. She had never expected to hear from them, had never imagined that her sacrifice would lead to anything but punishment and exile.
"I would like that very much," she said softly.
Daniel smiled, and this time it was a full, genuine smile that lit up his entire face.
"Good. I will make the arrangements."
They talked for a while longer, discussing Maya's upcoming transfer and what she might expect at the regional hospital. Daniel shared stories about his brother and his family, about the life that Marcus was living now thanks to her intervention. And Maya shared her own stories, the memories she had kept locked away for so long, the experiences that had shaped her into the person she was today. By the time Daniel left, it was well past midnight. Maya walked back to her quarters under a sky full of stars, her heart lighter than it had been in years. In 3 days, she would leave FOB Sentinel behind and start a new chapter of her life. A chapter filled with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. Maya packed her belongings, filed the necessary paperwork, and said goodbye to the few people at the base who had shown her kindness. Thomas was first among them, and their farewell was both brief and meaningful.
"I knew you would not be here forever," he told her. "You were always meant for bigger things." "Thank you for believing in me," Maya replied. "Even when no one else did."
Thomas shook his hand and pulled her into a brief, fatherly hug.
"Take care of yourself out there.
And remember, when things get tough, you can always come back here for a sunset." Maya laughed, the sound feeling strange and wonderful in her throat. She had not laughed much during her time at FOB Sentinel. But now, with everything that had happened, laughter felt natural again. The Special Forces team also made time to say goodbye. Thompson, who had started out as her biggest skeptic, gave her a bone-crushing handshake and told her that she was welcome to join them on any mission, anytime. Williams hugged her and promised to stay in touch. Rodriguez said little, but his quiet nod of respect spoke volumes. And then, there was Daniel. He found her on her last night at the base, sitting outside the medical tent and watching the stars. She heard his footsteps approaching and moved over to make room for him on the bench she had claimed.
"Last night," he said, sitting beside her. "How does it feel?" Maya thought about the question before answering. "Strange.
I spent 3 months wishing I was anywhere else. And now that I am finally leaving, part of me is going to miss it."
"That is the way of things," Daniel said. "We attach to places even when we do not want to.
They become part of us, for better or worse." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars wheel overhead. The desert night was cold, but Maya barely felt it. She was too lost in thought, too caught up in the enormity of everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. "I want to tell you something," Daniel said finally, his voice soft and serious.
"Something I have not told anyone else."
Maya turned to look at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his tone.
"What is it?"
Daniel took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for what he was about to say. "When I first started looking for you, it was purely about gratitude. I wanted to find the person who had saved my brother and make sure they were okay.
It was a debt I felt I needed to repay."
He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But the more I learned about you, the more I realized that there was something else.
Something more.
You were not just a name in a file or a story my brother told. You were a real person with your own struggles and strengths and dreams. And I found myself wanting to know you, not just as my brother's savior, but as yourself. Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. She was not sure where this conversation was going, but her heart was racing in anticipation. Over the past few days, working with you, seeing how you handle pressure and challenge, I have come to respect and admire you in ways I did not expect, Daniel continued. You are remarkable, Maya. Not just as a nurse or a soldier, but as a person. And I wanted you to know that before you leave. Maya did not know what to say. She had spent so long feeling worthless and forgotten that this sudden outpouring of appreciation was almost overwhelming. She looked at Daniel, at this man who had turned her life upside down in the best possible way, and felt tears threatening once again. I do not know what to say, she admitted. You do not have to say anything, Daniel replied. I just wanted you to know how I feel. Whatever happens next, wherever our paths take us, I wanted you to carry that with you. He stood up and offered her his hand. Maya took it and allowed him to pull her to her feet. They stood facing each other in the starlight, two people connected by circumstance and choice and something that might be the beginning of something more. I will see you tomorrow, Daniel said. For the departure. I will see you tomorrow, Maya echoed. He held her gaze for a moment longer, and then he walked away, leaving Maya alone with her thoughts and the infinite sky above. The next morning, Maya stood on the landing pad with her bags at her feet, watching the transport helicopter approach. The sun was rising behind her, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange. It was, she thought, a perfect day for a new beginning. The helicopter touched down, and the pilot waved her aboard. Maya picked up her bags and turned to take one last look at FOB Sentinel. The base that had been her prison for 3 months, that had witnessed her lowest moments and her greatest triumph, was now just a collection of buildings in the middle of nowhere. But it would always be a part of her story. She saw Daniel standing at the edge of the landing pad, watching her. He raised his hand in farewell, and she rose.